One of the major aspirations of Canada West is to see the natural resource sectors, agriculture, energy, mining, forestry, and fishery, recognized and treated as fundamental building blocks of the Western economy, but of the Canadian economy as a whole. We recently did a podcast on the subject of agriculture as one of those fundamental building blocks of the economy. And it was done with my colleague Marco Navarro-Jenny, who's a think tank person who's done a lot of work in these areas, and John Simpson, who's the longtime CEO of the Canna Group of companies, a longtime rancher in Alberta, and recently endowed the Simpson Centre at the University of Calgary for doing policy studies, particularly in the area of agribusiness and agri-foods. We got into the question of the size of the agricultural sector. People know the producing aspect of it, the farms and the ranches, etc. But a lot of people don't realize there's a manufacturing sector built on top of that. There's a service sector. There's an agricultural knowledge and technology sector built on top of that. So here is Marco and John discussing the size, the magnitude of the agricultural sector as a fundamental building block of the Canadian and Western economies.
And so we did a search in 2020, and we think that agriculture in Canada is 132 billion in GDP.
What percentage of GDP would that be? Or you figure?
I think it's close to 10%.
Well, and John, though, isn't it true, like you mentioned, it's siloed that way by commodities and whatever, isn't, and Marco's heard me on this ad nauseum, isn't it also, there's an agriculture producing sector, but there's an agriculture manufacturing sector on top of that. There's an agricultural service sector on top of that, and there's an agriculture knowledge and technology sector. I was riding on an airplane a while back ended up sitting beside an executive of the John Deere company, and he told me that at some future date, I can't remember that date, the biggest asset of that company will not be those factories producing the green machines. It will be the data that is being collected off those machines all over the world and connected to a particular point on the earth. So isn't it true that the agriculture sector is a lot bigger and more fundamental than a lot of people who just think of it as the producing sector, whether it's grain, whether it's cattle, whether it is?
We seem to have a kind of 19th century understanding of agriculture still in Canada, that it involves farms, that still use animal power. That's sort of the quaint understanding that many city people still have. They don't realize that it is a sector that is highly powered on tremendous high tech and enormous amount of investments in innovation.
It's the standard. The standard comes out as beef. Beef is almost 10 billion. Canola is 9 billion. Wheat is 7 billion. Pork is 4.5 billion. And pulses are 2 billion now. That's in Canada.
And that's the producing sector.
Yeah, that's
just the
producing
That's
sector.
just the producing sector. It doesn't have anything to do with making canola oil. It doesn't have anything to do with making bread.
But you wouldn't be able to make the bread if you didn't have the producing sector.
So that's why this 132 billion is the biggest guess we've got. I think it doesn't include equine. It doesn't include dairy. It doesn't include sheep. It doesn't include manufacturing. It doesn't include this new technology and infrastructure. So we've decided we're going to do a paper to try to figure out how big this balloon is.
Well, that would be very crucial, I think, because I don't think the public, and certainly a lot of the policymakers and the politicians, understand the magnitude of this particular resource sector.
Yeah, it's 7.4% of the GDP. So
the measurable part.
The measurable parts that you're talking about.
We know about it.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's probably double that.
So if you want more of that discussion, please visit thewesternstory.ca, episode 2. We then got onto the problem of the rural-urban divide, the fact that only 18% of Canada's population now lives in rural areas where these natural resource sectors find their home, and over 80% of Canadians live in urban areas, some distance from these natural resources sectors. And so here's a discussion of the rural-urban divide. What can be done to strengthen the role of Canada Rural, involving Marco and John? I guess one other issue that connects to this is and other people have referred to it as the rural-urban divide. That you got these resource sectors, let's take agriculture, is out there in the country. But the majority of votes today are in cities. I think the statistics are 18% of the Canadian population is now considered rural. Over 80% is considered urban. So to get any kind of policy change that you got to get through a parliament or through a legislature on resource development, you got to convince. For every one person in the country who may be in favor of it, there's 5 people in the city who don't have the foggiest notion about it. So how do you bridge this urban-rural divide? Because I think if one could, it would advance the kind of policies you're talking about.
I think one of the things that's happened as a result of our past 2 years of battling with COVID is that people are beginning to understand that groceries don't grow on shelves. And they're also beginning to understand that they know they want to eat beef once a week, and they know how much that's going to cost. And they want to know more about the production and the capabilities of how everything's grown. So they're becoming more picky at what they're doing, but they're getting a better idea of what agriculture is all about. And that should help get the urban divide. It should help.
Yeah.
It won't resolve it. We still need to break the nut with the big politicians as to how big agriculture is and how important it is to our economy, and get them to understand that if they stop, one of the ideas that Trudeau came up with recently was to reduce the amount of fertilizer we have to use by 25%. Just a statement, we'll do that.
Just out of the blue.
Just out of the blue, without any consultation with what that would happen, what would that do to our GDP. Just that's an idea. Somebody told them that would be a good thing to do, right?
Lastly, and most importantly, we got onto the subject of what to do, besides discussion and research, what to do if we want to strengthen the recognition and the treatment of the agricultural sector as a fundamental building block of the economy. And here's Marco and John on that subject. Well, maybe the question we can end up on, John, unless you've got some other things you want to add. One of the things I worry about, even with podcasts and all the internet discussion and Facebook and Twittering and tweeting, is that we talk about these issues. We talk about them ad infinitum, but we don't do anything. So there's somebody out there who's watching this podcast who agrees with 80% or 90% of what we've said here. But what can we tell them to do to advance this recognition of the fundamental importance of the agricultural sector? What can the average person out there who agrees maybe with 90% of what we're saying, what can they do as distinct from just talking about it?
I believe that this John Simpson, if he was 18 again, and if he had the luxury of knowing and the wisdom that I've got over 70 years of life about agriculture, is what I would do is I would go to university, maybe in Edmonton, or I might go to Guelph or something, and I would get really, really, really knowledgeable about agriculture. Okay. And I would go and I would look at all of the places where there's opportunity, because it's the last frontier of industry that's got so much ability to expand. We're going to continue to draw oil and gas out of the ground until there isn't any. But agriculture doesn't have a limit. There's no limit to what we can do if we do it better and we get more people doing that. And there was a wise old man that said once, and I've always remembered this, opportunity knocks, and it knocks often. Sometimes it comes disguised as hard work. So you go pick that. You go pick that product that say you want to be the guy that's going to build the world's biggest canola plant in Tabor, and go for it.
Again, thanks for joining us. And if you want more on the subject of agriculture as a fundamental building block of the Western and Canadian economies, please visit thewesternstory.ca, episode 2.